Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love Masters of the Universe Battleground from Archon Studio. And yes, a lot of my love comes from having awesome miniature versions of my childhood favourites to paint, but it's also a really solid skirmish game. There are things I don't like about it, but it's become a firm favourite nevertheless. Well, today we're going to take a look at the most recent expansion for Battleground, Wave 4, The Power of the Evil Horde. This is a new faction starter set, giving you enough characters and cards to start running the Evil Horde, as opposed to the Masters of the Universe or the Evil Warriors, which were the two factions in the core game. But it is important to note, this is not a new starter set for the game. You can't just buy this box and start playing, you will need a copy of the core game too, or you will need to know someone who has the core game. That being said, this is still a fantastic box packed with stuff. You are getting 8 characters from the Evil Horde, that's 4 named characters, then 2 Horde Troopers and 2 Horde Wraiths. Then you get 4 new terrain elements, 37 new cards, that's character cards, weapons, equipment, fate and glory cards. Then there is a manual containing all the new rules and rules clarifications and some brand new scenarios. And this has a recommended retail price of £34. I got it for £27. I think this is exceptionally good value. It's not often you can get a faction box with that much stuff in it for less than £30, especially for a licensed franchise like Masters of the Universe, and especially for a product made in the EU. But despite that, I have to admit, I did feel that this expansion was slightly lacking. It feels a little bit weird to say that after praising the value, but I will explain in a moment. First, let's look at what we're getting here. There is one frame containing 6 of our characters. We aren't going to spend too long looking at this because I will be building all of these characters at the end of the video, but there's a few things to note. First, obviously, is the colour. These miniatures have been cast in red plastic, and with the Masters of the Universe being in a sort of bone colour and the Evil Warriors being in purple, it means the factions are colour coded out of the box, and that makes them just a little bit easier to use while unpainted. Unless, of course, your opponent is playing the same faction you are. The Evil Horde is a horde force, unsurprisingly, which relies on low-level lackeys to a certain degree. So in this box there are only 4 named characters, and they're all on this sprue. There's Hordak, as you would expect, and then one of my favourites, Grizzlaw. Then we have 2 characters that I don't know too much about and don't have any great love for, Catra and Shadow Weaver. The other 2 miniatures on the sprue are Horde Troopers, and they are both different, which is a really nice touch, as it will make them easier to identify on the battlefield. And immediately I can see that these miniatures aren't going to be too fiddly to work with. Glancing at the included instruction manual, it's apparent that many of the models are only in 4 or 5 pieces, including their base. Hordak is just 5 pieces, while Grizzlaw and Shadow Weaver are only 4. That's going to make assembly much simpler, and I like that. There are no customization options for these miniatures, so it just makes sense to cut them up as little as possible. Moving on, we also get 2 identical frames, each containing 2 trees and 1 Shadow Wraith. This means that unfortunately the 2 Shadow Wraiths are identical, and this is the first area where I feel this expansion is slightly lacking. I think there are ways they could have provided 2 different Wraiths. They could have sculpted 2 and then put them on the first frame I showed you. Alternatively, they could have cast a few additional pieces on this frame, giving you a choice of 2 different ways to build each Wraith. Regardless, it is what it is. I'll have to come up with some way to make the models distinct through my painting. Not that these are going to get painted for a while anyway. I need to prioritise all my favourites from the existing factions first. Moving on, let's take a look at what our new characters do and how the Evil Horde plays. It's pretty interesting actually, because they are geared around working in large numbers, benefiting from having weaker teammates and finding ways to return discarded fate cards to their hand so they have enough to activate all of their units. Here's Hordak, who costs 21 points. Interesting character because he doesn't start off great, but he buffs himself through the loss of allies. He has 5 health, 3 toughness, 3 mind, 3 power, 4 perception, 3 strength, and a move of 5 or 8 when focused. However, his ruthless leader ability means he gains 1 power and 1 strength every time an ally is knocked out, up to a maximum of 3. That means he caps at 6 power and 6 strength, making him pretty formidable in the endgame. He also has the skill I Command You, which costs 1 action and 1 mana. He can choose an ally with an Endless Horde ability, that's basically Troopers and Wraiths, within 12 inches, and then an enemy within 16 inches. The ally interrupts Hordak's turn, but targets the selected enemy. Hordak's basic equipment is the energy cannon for 2 points. Range 12 but -2 attack dice. This is a weapon that will buff as Hordak buffs, because before attacking you test your power and gain an attack dice for each success, up to 5 extra attack dice. Once Hordak's power is maxed out, that cannon becomes quite deadly. Next is Grislaw, who is the bruiser in the team and costs just 15 points. Unfortunately, he is no way near as strong as he is represented in the mini-comic that introduced him to the toy line. 15 points is actually less than it costs to bring Orko onto your team. He has 6 health, 3 toughness, 1 mind, 2 power, 3 perception, 4 strength and a move of 4 or 6 when focused. His abilities are ones that have good synergies with other characters, keying into the way the Horde likes to play. That is, sacrificing their own minions and manipulating the fate deck. His Covered with Fur ability gains him 1 mana anytime you discard a fate card during any activation. His Ferocious Warrior ability lets him interrupt whenever an enemy knocks out one of his allies. His Hordak's basic equipment, which costs 3 points, is very powerful. It lets him spend 2 mana to gain either 2 attack dice or a focus token, or 4 mana for both. It can cause up to 3 wounds from a single attack. Next we have Shadow Weaver, who is incredibly fragile. She costs 16 points, she has 4 health, 1 toughness, 4 mind, 5 power, 2 perception, 2 strength and a speed of 5 or 8. Her real strength comes from her abilities, which are quite intricate. I would say she is one of the more nuanced characters in the game, with a risk-reward style of gameplay that could be her downfall. Her mind control ability costs 2 mana and it lets her test power against the mind of an enemy within 16 inches. If she succeeds, the enemy interrupts her and must use its action to move towards her. This is a good way to pull a character out of position. However, that character is free to play additional fate and glory cards while interrupting, so this ability could horribly backfire if the target is able to play cards that turn the situation to their advantage. Shadow Weaver's second ability is Shadow Magic, which states whenever an ally is knocked out, all of its mana transfers to her. That's pretty neat, but it gets even better when you consider her basic starting spell, Overwhelming Power, which costs just 1 point. This spell has a range of 16 inches and gains +1 attack dice. When successful, the spell will inflict up to 2 wounds, but will also give the target mana tokens. Additionally, if the spell knocks out the target, all of the target's allies gain 2 mana tokens as well. This sounds horrible, inflicting a maximum of 2 wounds, but in exchange gifting the target mana seems like a bad deal. But Overwhelming Power costs 0 mana to cast, and importantly, it can be used against allies as well as enemies. And if you use it against a trooper or wraith, you get 2 extra attack dice. Suddenly, this spell becomes much more interesting and convoluted, especially considered in conjunction with the abilities of the other Evil Horde teammates. Consider this: Shadow Weaver casts Overwhelming Power on a badly injured Horde trooper, which means she gets to roll 2 extra attack dice. She gets 4 successes, which gives the trooper 3 mana tokens, but then kills it. As it dies, every other Horde player gains 2 mana tokens. Then Shadow Weaver's Shadow Magic ability kicks in and she claims all the mana tokens that she just stacked onto that trooper. Then Hordak gains 1 power and 1 strength, and finally Grislaw gets to make a free interrupt. Your opponent isn't going to know what hit them. Then we have Catra, who costs 15 points. She's the rogue in the pack. She has 4 health, 2 toughness, 3 mind, 3 power, 4 perception, 4 strength and a speed of 5 or 8. Her first ability is Nimble Evasion. Once per round, when she receives at least 1 wound, she can discard a fate card to reduce the damage by 1. Her second ability is called It Belongs to Me. When she activates or interrupts, she can discard a glory card to gain 2 actions, or discard a fate card to gain a free 2-hex move that cannot be interrupted. These are both good abilities, but they are going to burn through your fate deck quickly, so you will need to look for ways to recycle those cards back into play, or you will end up twiddling your thumbs while the other player batters you. Her basic equipment is Catra's Whip, which is 2 points. A really nice quick weapon that lets you draw fate cards when you inflict damage, and which also allows you to spend 2 mana after making a melee attack with any weapon to make a free melee attack using the whip. Then we move on to our minions. First, the 2 Horde troopers. These only cost 7 points to bring into play, so you can get 2 for less than the cost of any of the currently available named characters. They have 3 health, 3 toughness, 1 mind, 1 power, 3 perception, 3 strength, and a move of 5 or 8. Their real strength is in their low cost, their expendability, their abilities, and the way they synergize with the other characters. They really only have one ability because Endless Horde just allows you to take 2 of them instead of 1. Oh, and that's a good thing to point out for people who are hoping to get more troopers to run a big horde. 2 is the cap. Their main ability is really good. When they get knocked out, you shuffle 2 random fate cards from your discard pile back into your deck. Unfortunately, that does seem to make them pretty much essential for an Evil Horde team, which is a bit of a shame. I wouldn't like to see too many rules that really limit your team building options this way. Horde troopers don't have any basic weapons. They have 1 melee, 1 ranged and 1 trinket slot though, so you can give them a bit of equipment if you really want to. Although to a certain degree, this can minimise the point of taking these cheap units. One thing to note here is the cards are different. On the front, the troopers are looking in different directions, and on the reverse there is the same image of 2 troopers, but a different trooper is highlighted in each one. This is to help you identify which card relates to which miniatures on the board, which is pretty neat. Finally, we have our 2 wraiths, which weigh in at 9 points each. They have 3 health, 1 toughness, 3 mind, 4 power, 2 perception, 3 strength, and a move of 5 or 8. Like the troopers, they have the Endless Horde ability. They also have for the Evil Horde, so when they are knocked out, they can spend 2 mana to switch positions with an ally. This is a fantastic way to get the drop on an enemy. Imagine an enemy attacks the Wraith in melee and defeats it, so the Wraith teleports out and drops in an enraged Grizzlor in its place. It's a really good way to ambush an enemy, and it's indicative of the exciting ways that these characters can interact. Oh, and Wraiths don't get basic weapons either. The reverse of the card shows the same image, but coloured in green and orange. So I guess I will be working those colours into my paint schemes to make it easy to tell which card relates to which miniature. And that's it for our characters. I admit, not a lot of my favourites in there. Really only Hordak, Grizzlor and the troopers. But I do like the synergies between the different skill sets. That's good stuff. Moving on, we have 3 additional melee weapons. The Propeller Arm is a bit of a laugh. It costs 3 points to equip and has a hefty cost to use on the battlefield. You can discard up to 3 fate cards to gain 1 attack dice for each card discarded, and you have the potential to inflict up to 3 wounds. The Dragon Staff is a cheap weapon that grants +1 attack dice and can inflict up to 2 wounds, but unfortunately, after using it you have to immediately end your current activation. The Horde Staff for me is the winner of the bunch. It costs 3 points, but that isn't surprising because although it only inflicts up to 2 wounds, when the character with the staff activates, they gain 1 mana for each knocked out ally to a maximum of 3, which is amazing. We also have 2 ranged weapons. I'm a bit concerned to see Modulok's 2-sided gun here, as I would have expected that to be his basic weapon, and that means I am assuming we aren't going to be getting him as a playable character, which would be a real shame. It's a decent weapon for the 2-point cost. It has a range of 12 inches, inflicts up to 2 wounds, has a chance to remove a buff from the target, and also bypasses any shield the target is equipped with. The other weapon is the Cosmic Blaster, which only costs 1 point. It has a range of 12, inflicts up to 2 wounds, but after firing it the user has to immediately end their activation, as with the Dragon Staff. Then we have 2 spells, both of which interact with a target's mana level in interesting ways. Calamity costs 4 points, and it's no wonder because it's pretty devastating. It costs 3 mana points to cast, which means you really need a character like Shadow Weaver to use it consistently. The range is only 8 inches, and the maximum damage output caps at 3, but the fun part is the special rule. The target of the spell can choose to either roll defense dice equal to the number of mana they have, or else roll for normal using their mind value, but only rolls of a 6 count as successes. An excellent spell for sniping your smartest foes. The second spell, Mana Burn, is also very powerful. It costs 3 points. It only costs 1 mana to cast though. The range is 12 inches, but the attack roll is made with -2 dice. However, you gain an additional attack dice for every mana token on the target. Not only can it inflict up to 2 wounds, but it can also cause the target to lose up to 3 mana tokens, making it a great way to use an opponent's resources against them and then drain those resources afterwards. I like both of these spells a lot, and I think they work well with some of the other cards we've seen in this set. Next we have some items. These are the smaller size cards. 1 shield, the Cat Shield, which costs 2 points and grants the user a mana token if they face a frontal attack. 1 armour, full plate armour, which costs 1 point and prevents the wearer from being pushed or pulled. And then 6 trinkets. The Eldritch Book of Spells, a 2-pointer item that lets the user make a free attack of any type if they successfully knock out another character. The Magic Boots, which cost 1 point and give the wearer +1 regular movement or +2 movement while focused. The Cat Mask, which costs 1 point and lets the user change their facing at the end of their activation. We have the Horde Armband, a 1-point item that grants the wearer 1 mana every time an ally is knocked out. The Harp, a 1-point item that lets the user discard a fate card during any test to gain 2 free rerolls. And finally, my favourite, the Bat. This also costs 1 point, but it costs 2 mana points to use it. When you pay the cost, you test the wearer's mind value +1 for each enemy within 12 inches, and you can draw 1 fate card for each success to a maximum of 3. The last cards in the set are 8 fate cards and 2 glory cards. I'm not going to go through these in detail, you can pause the video to read them, but unsurprisingly the fate cards mainly feature special bonuses that key into the Evil Horde strategy of discarding fate cards for bonuses and then taking those cards back from the discard pile. Many of the fate cards have a bonus that specifically triggers when the card is discarded during your activation, and they will do things like grant extra mana, a focus token, or even allow you to draw cards into your hand. And there are several others that let you take cards from either your draw pile or your discard pile. And there's some great stuff there, but I do think there are perhaps not quite enough cards in this box. As I said earlier in the video, this expansion is great value, but it still feels slightly lacking in some aspects. The 2 identical wraiths is one area, and the other is in the slim selection of new cards. For the launch of a new faction, I was expecting a whole new deck of fate cards and glory cards, all keying into the Horde's particular style of play, and I was really expecting a nice big wedge of new equipment. What we get is good, but I think I was just expecting slightly more, enough to make it feel like I could happily create a Horde team using just the contents of this box without having to draw on anything from the core game or previous expansions. It's probably an unfair complaint, especially as I haven't even mentioned the new rules book yet. This weighs in at 16 pages and contains a full contents list, a small FAQ section for some of the new cards, and the rules for the trees. The rules for the trees are not much of much really. Trees cover 4 hexes and are treated as low obstacles except you cannot move over a tree unless you jump or teleport, and characters on higher elevation cannot ignore trees when determining line of sight. That is disappointing, a little. I mean, the trees are cool, and new terrain with any kind of new rules creates new environments and considerations to explore, but I guess I was expecting something a little more. But anyway, the book also contains 6 new scenarios. There are 4 of the tournament style scenarios, the kind of map layout for a standard game that you could play in a tournament setting, but there is also something I am much more interested in, 2 special advanced battlegrounds that feel a little more narrative. Archon Studio have already done this once before with the Preturnia expansion, and I'm very pleased to see this continue. The scenarios still aren't heavily narrative, but they break the basic framework of the game in specific ways and feel a bit more fresh and inventive. In one, the Evil Horde player can continually respawn their troopers and wraiths. The other team has to survive the onslaught for 4 turns. In the second one, the players are battling in the Forest of Life, where they can only score victory points by completing the missions on their glory cards. Each turn, both players draw up to 2 glory cards, so they are getting a constant stream of new challenges to accomplish. Interestingly, there are objective tokens on the board, but a character claiming one takes a wound, so the teams are facing a war of attrition against the environment as well as each other. And that is basically it. What do I think? I think this is a really good box of stuff. Lovely miniatures, some interesting new cards, some cool new terrain, and some new scenarios. It's more of what we've seen before and what we expect from this game. And now we have a 3rd faction, which is cool. I do have minor issues with the set. I would have liked it to feel slightly more robust as a starter, with enough cards to have a deck to play right out of the box. I would have preferred to see Mantenna and Leech, and I wish the Wraiths looked slightly different from each other. I also feel the Evil Horde's playstyle might railroad choices just a little too much. If you know you are always going to be seeing 2 Wraiths and 2 Troopers every time the Evil Horde turn up, there is a risk of the faction feeling a little stale after a while. Additionally, as much as I appreciate the new scenarios, especially the advanced ones, I still feel like they could be doing more with them. I'm still waiting for that scenario that truly captures the spirit of the franchise, with a well integrated plot or a reason for the fight, and interesting special rules and events that help to colour the world and make it feel lived in and real. But at the end of the day, it's hard to wag a finger at this expansion too much. It does far more right than it does wrong. Now, let's assemble some miniatures. So here's Hordak. This is a great miniature. Love the bat on his shoulder and the way his cape billows around his staff. Not only does that look cool, it also strengthens what would otherwise be a weak part of the miniature. The hardest part of assembly here was adding a small ring to the end of his arm cannon. That piece only existed to allow for a recessed barrel so nobody had to bother getting out their pin vise drill to drill it out. So it was a nice touch, but the tiny piece of plastic required to make that feature was a bit of a pain to work with. Then we have Grislaw. I love this miniature, it went together really easily. However, he does have a crossbow mounted on his back, and I chose to leave that off for now to make it easier to paint later on. I do wish his hand axes were just slightly bigger and he felt a bit more imposing, but this is still one of my favourite sculpts here. This is Catra, and I hate this miniature in so many ways. It was horrible to put together. It had connectors attached to her cat ears, which were really difficult to cut and file without damaging those ears. Where the shoulder of her whip arm connects to the torso, there was quite an ugly join which I ended up filling with plastic glue. The thigh of her left leg isn't keyed well, so it was slightly out of alignment and I had to twist it when the glue was almost set. And there's a point on her cape where the whip is supposed to attach for additional support, and initially the whip wouldn't hold in the right place and I ended up getting some plastic glue where it wasn't supposed to be. That's going to require some cleanup before I paint. And speaking of painting, this one is going to be a nuisance. It has negative space in the middle of the miniature and the whip wraps around all the way down to the ground. It looks great, really dynamic, but it's the kind of design I don't have fun painting. Our final named character is Shadow Weaver. This is a really nice design, really clean and well sculpted. I love the way she is holding her wand partially under her cloak and you can see the line of it through the fabric. I'm not normally a fan of sculpted spell effects on models, but this one is quite nice, and it's possibly even necessary to add some additional interest to an otherwise quite simple figure. Then we have two different troopers. First, the one with the dragon staff. This is great. It's suitably chunky and I like the posing a lot. There were quite a lot of mould lines to clean up on this one though, and I keep spotting bits I've missed. Then we have our second trooper with the shield and horde crossbow. This is another nicely sculpted piece, even if it does, like a few others in this set, fall back on the old trope of the tactical rock to stand on. The crossbow is suitably ridiculous and the shield is just lovely. Overall, very happy with this one, although again quite a lot of mould lines on the smooth parts of the legs and the arms. And then we have our horde wraiths, and this is an absolutely gorgeous sculpt. I don't have a strong connection with the wraiths, they aren't the most exciting thing in the box for me, but nevertheless I can appreciate this design. The flowing cape, the clawing hand, the staff, it's great work. And of course I can't forget the trees. Here's the two different designs. I love a good tree miniature, and these are very nice. The incredible twisted nature of their designs is perfectly fitting for inclusion with the Evil Horde set, and as was pointed out to me previously, the tree with the vultures draws some inspiration from the old Fright Zone playset, which is a cool detail. But that is it for this quick look at the miniatures. Overall, it's a really nice set. Catra was a pain, but the rest went together easily and they look suitably intimidating. Let me know which is your favourite miniature in the comments, because that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone, bye bye.